Most fighters do not chase flexibility because loose range rarely transfers. They build usable range where strength and control exist together. That difference decides whether motion helps performance or weakens positions. Passive stretching gives length, but combat demands force inside length. A high kick needs access, stability, balance, and rapid braking. Touching your toes does not guarantee any of those qualities. The body trusts positions it can actively control under tension. It resists positions that feel unstable, weak, or neurologically unsafe. That is why many athletes look mobile, yet move poorly. Their joints access range, but their muscles cannot own it. Usable range means you can enter, hold, and exit smoothly. It is mobility with force, not flexibility without structure. Fighters train this through loaded movement, not endless static poses. They lift the leg, rotate the hip, and resist collapse. That teaches the nervous system that deeper positions are usable. Once the brain feels safety, range often expands naturally. This is not magic, and it is not genetics alone. It is coordination, strength, tissue tolerance, and motor learning. Muscles do not simply lengthen like rubber bands under command. They change behavior when the system accepts the new position. That system includes the brain, spinal cord, muscles, and connective tissue. Stretching can reduce resistance briefly, but strength makes results stay. Without strength, new range disappears once the session ends. This explains why some people stretch daily and stay limited. They practice tolerance, but never develop control inside tolerance. Combat sports punish uncontrolled motion with slower reactions and weaker strikes. Every extreme position must still produce force and absorb force. That requirement changes how smart mobility training should look. Instead of hanging passively, fighters usually raise limbs actively. Instead of relaxing completely, they create tension in strategic muscles. Hip flexors lift the leg while glutes stabilize the pelvis. Adductors lengthen, then contract, teaching force through deeper angles. The trunk stays organized so the spine does not compensate. That matters because fake range often comes from stolen positions. The lower back bends, the pelvis tilts, and technique suffers. It looks impressive, but it is borrowed movement. Borrowed movement breaks under speed, fatigue, and impact. Owned movement survives chaos because the body can organize it. That is the real purpose of mobility for fighters. Not bigger shapes, but better positions under violent demands. A usable hip range improves kicks, sprawls, guard work, and footwork. A usable shoulder range improves punching angles and clinch stability. A usable ankle range improves stance depth and directional changes. The common pattern is simple. Access plus control equals performance. Access without control equals instability dressed up as mobility. So fighters do not worship stretching as an isolated skill. They train range the same way they train striking, with repetition, intention, tension, and positions that actually transfer. The goal is not to move more, but move usefully. Real mobility is strength expressing itself at the edge. Most people confuse stretching sensation with actual mobility improvement. That sensation is often just nervous system tolerance, not structural change. The body allows deeper positions when threat perception decreases temporarily. But without strength, that permission quickly gets taken away again. Fighters cannot rely on temporary permission during fast, unpredictable exchanges. They need permanent access to range under full muscular tension. This shifts training from passive duration toward active repetition. Instead of holding splits, they repeatedly enter and exit controlled ranges. That builds coordination between agonist and antagonist muscle groups. Agonists create movement, while antagonists must decelerate and stabilize. If antagonists are weak, the brain limits range for safety. This is why forced flexibility often leads to strain or injury. The joint reaches positions that surrounding muscles cannot support properly. Fighters avoid this by strengthening the end ranges directly. They pause briefly in extreme positions, then return under control. This creates strength exactly where most injuries tend to occur. End range strength increases joint stability and force transfer efficiency. Force transfer means energy moves cleanly through the kinetic chain. Kinetic chain refers to linked segments producing coordinated movement. A kick starts from the ground, not just the leg. An unstable hip disrupts force before it reaches the target. So mobility training must respect full body integration, not isolated joints. This is where many gym routines fail to transfer into sport. They train muscles separately, but movement happens as a system. Fighters train patterns, not just parts, even during mobility work. For example, controlled kicks build both hip mobility and balance simultaneously. The standing leg stabilizes while the moving leg explores range. This creates usable mobility under real constraints like gravity and balance. Another method uses slow eccentrics to enter deeper joint angles. Eccentric means muscles lengthen while still producing controlled force. This teaches tissues to tolerate load while lengthening, not just relaxing. That adaptation is crucial for absorbing strikes or resisting takedowns. Static stretching alone does not prepare tissue for those demands. It lacks speed, tension, and reactive components required in combat. However, stretching is not useless when applied with correct intention. It can reduce stiffness and prepare tissues before active training. It can also assist recovery by increasing blood flow temporarily. The mistake is treating it as the primary mobility solution. Fighters treat stretching as a tool, not the foundation. The foundation remains strength, expressed through expanding ranges. This principle applies beyond fighting into general athletic performance. Sprinters, lifters, and team athletes all benefit from usable range because performance always requires force production within joint limits. Those limits expand safely only when strength supports the expansion. Otherwise, the body restricts movement to protect itself from damage. Protection always overrides performance in the nervous system hierarchy. So training must convince the body that deeper range is safe. Safety comes from control, not from passive exposure alone. This is the hidden rule behind fighters who move efficiently. They do not just reach positions, they own them completely. The biggest mistake is chasing extreme range without building strength first. That creates fragile mobility, which collapses under speed and resistance. Fighters prioritize resilience because their environment punishes weak positions instantly. Every movement must survive impact, timing pressure, and opponent interference. So range development always includes tension, timing, and positional awareness. Mobility becomes a skill, not just a physical attribute. Skills require repetition under realistic constraints to become reliable. This is why shadowboxing often doubles as mobility training. Slow, controlled strikes explore range while maintaining structure and balance. Each repetition teaches the nervous system how to organize movement efficiently. Efficiency reduces wasted energy and improves reaction speed under fatigue. This directly affects endurance without adding extra conditioning sessions. Because inefficient movement consumes more energy for the same output. So usable range is also an energy management strategy. The body prefers efficient patterns that feel stable and repeatable. Unstable patterns create hesitation, slowing execution and decision-making. That hesitation is often mistaken for lack of technique or experience. But the deeper issue is missing control in critical joint ranges. Once control improves, confidence and speed often improve automatically. This is the hidden link between mobility and skill expression. Better positions allow cleaner technique without compensations or breakdowns. Compensations shift stress in the joints and tissues not designed for it. Over time, this leads to chronic pain or sudden injury. Fighters reduce this risk by owning positions before loading them explosively. They progress from slow control towards speed and reactivity gradually. This respects how the nervous system adapts to new movement demands. Adaptation requires repeated exposure with manageable levels of stress. Too much intensity too early reinforces protective stiffness instead of mobility. Too little challenge fails to stimulate meaningful adaptation in tissues. So the correct approach sits between comfort and overload. Controlled discomfort signals growth without triggering defensive restriction. This principle applies to both strength training and mobility work. The body adapts to stress it can manage and recover from. Recovery allows tissues and neural patterns to consolidate improvements. Without recovery, progress stalls and injury risk increases significantly. Fighters balance training intensity with recovery to maintain consistent performance. Consistency matters more than occasional extreme sessions for long-term development. Small improvements repeated daily compound into significant performance gains. This applies especially to mobility, which adapts gradually over time. There are no shortcuts when building usable, reliable joint range. But there is a clear path grounded in physiology and motor learning. Train range actively, strengthen end positions, and integrate full body patterns. This builds mobility that transfers directly into performance environments. Stretching alone cannot provide that level of functional adaptation. It lacks the necessary elements of force, coordination, and context. Fighters understand this, even if they do not explain it scientifically. Their training reflects principles shaped by real-world feedback and survival. Movements either work under pressure or they get discarded quickly. That feedback loop creates highly efficient and practical mobility strategies. Usable range is not optional. It is required for effective movement. Most people still believe more stretching automatically improves performance. But performance depends on force expression, not passive joint range alone. Force expression requires coordination between muscles and the nervous system. Without coordination, added range becomes disconnected from usable movement patterns. This disconnect explains why flexibility rarely improves athletic execution directly. Fighters solve this by linking mobility work with skill-specific actions. They never separate range development from actual movement demands. This integration creates faster learning and more reliable performance under stress. The nervous system prefers patterns that resemble real task conditions. So isolated stretching lacks relevance for complex athletic situations. Relevance determines how well training transfers into real performance. High transfer means skills remain stable under fatigue and pressure. Low transfer means abilities disappear when conditions become unpredictable. Fighters cannot afford low transfer, so they train accordingly. They prioritize drills that challenge balance, timing, and joint control simultaneously. This builds adaptable movement instead of rigid, isolated capacity. Adaptability is critical because no two exchanges are exactly identical. The body must solve movement problems in real time. That requires both mobility and stability working together dynamically. Mobility provides options, while stability ensures those options remain usable. Too much mobility without stability creates chaos and energy leaks. Too much stability without mobility creates stiffness and limited options. Performance exists where these two qualities are balanced precisely. Fighters train this balance through controlled variability in movement. They explore different ranges, speeds, and angles within safe limits. This expands their movement vocabulary without sacrificing control. Vocabulary here means available movement solutions for different situations. A larger vocabulary allows quicker adaptation during unpredictable exchanges. But every new option must still be stable under load. Otherwise, the nervous system will reject it during high-stress moments. This rejection appears as hesitation, stiffness, or technical breakdown. So fighters reinforce new ranges with strength before increasing speed. Speed amplifies errors if control has not been established first. This is why progression order matters in effective training design. Control comes first, then load, then speed, then reactivity. Skipping steps leads to plateaus or recurring injuries over time. The body always enforces correct order through pain or restriction. Understanding this prevents wasted effort and unnecessary setbacks. It also explains why advanced athletes often train slower than beginners. They refine control at deeper ranges instead of chasing visible intensity. Visible intensity impresses observers, but invisible control builds real performance. Fighters invest in what works. not what looks impressive externally. This mindset separates long-term progress from short-term illusion. So mobility becomes a byproduct of correct training, not a separate goal. When strength expands into new ranges, mobility improves automatically. When mobility improves with strength, it remains stable and usable. This closes the loop between capacity and performance. Fighters understand this loop through experience, not just theory. They train to own positions, not just reach them temporarily. That is why fighters do not stretch. They build usable range.